You know that sudden sinking feeling you get when you're scrolling through your phone, looking at someone else's perfect life? We all do it. We literally all have this fundamentally human drive to compare ourselves to others. So in this explainer, we're going to trace the psychology behind that exact feeling. We'll start by looking inside our own internal thoughts and some foundational theories, and then trace that all the way to how it completely shapes our experiences on modern social media. So if you've ever felt a pang of inadequacy sitting in a highly competitive classroom or just swiping through your feed, you are definitely going to want to pay close attention to this one.
Here is a quick look at our agenda today. First, the drive to compare. Second, reflection versus comparison. Third, who compares the most. Fourth, the big fish effect. And finally, the social media amplifier. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the drive to compare, Festinger's foundational theory. We really need to look at where the academic study of this incredibly relatable habit actually started.
Way back in 1954, Leon Festinger basically changed the entire landscape of psychology with his social comparison theory, and he pointed out a really crucial truth. Comparing ourselves to others, it's not a personal failing. It's not some character flaw you need to fix. It is a hardwired evolutionary drive. We have this deep-seated need to evaluate exactly where we stand in the pack. When we don't have a clear, objective metric, like a ruler or a stopwatch to measure our opinions or our abilities, we automatically just turn to the people around us. It's how we figure out our place in the world and, crucially, how we reduce uncertainty. Now, Festinger split this drive right down the middle into two distinct categories. First, we compare opinions. This is basically us looking around the room and asking, what should I think about this? It's totally driven by our desire for conformity and belonging. But on the other side, we compare abilities. This is where we ask, how am I doing? And here's the real picker for abilities. In Western cultures especially, there's what he called a unidirectional drive upward, meaning we don't just want to fit in, we want to have a slightly nicer lawn or a slightly better GPA than the person next door. We're constantly pushed to outperform our peers.
Moving right along to section 2, reflection versus comparison, Tesser's self-evaluation maintenance. Let's look at how the success of the people closest to us can either make us feel incredibly proud or, well, deeply insecure. If we draw from Abraham Tesser's 1982 research on the self-evaluation maintenance model, which you can actually find housed in the ERIC database, we get a really clear picture of how this operates in our immediate social circles. Tesser proposed that humans are fiercely motivated to maintain a positive self-evaluation. Basically, we desperately want to feel good about ourselves. And the social circumstances around us, particularly when our friends succeed, can severely impact that feeling.
Tesser identified two main reactions when a friend knocks it out of the park. First is the reflection process. Imagine your neighbor suddenly becomes a famous lawyer on TV. You might proudly brag about them to literally everyone you meet. You're basking in their reflected glory. And surprisingly, that actually raises your own self-evaluation. But then there's the comparison process. This is when your close peers' outstanding performance doesn't make you proud at all. It actively threatens your self-worth and lowers your self-evaluation. It's the difference between genuinely cheering them on and secretly hoping their new television show gets canceled.
So why do we sometimes reflect their glory and other times ruthlessly compare? Well, Tesser identified three variables here: performance, closeness, and the ultimate tiebreaker, relevance. Both processes require the other person to actually perform well and be close to you. But relevance, that changes the whole game. If your best friend succeeds in a field that just isn't relevant to your core identity, like say they win a huge cooking contest and you don't even like to cook, you reflect their glory with immense pride. But if they beat you in your own highly relevant dream career, yeah, that sparks the painful comparison process and becomes a massive threat to your self-worth.
Okay, section 3. Who compares the most? The traits of comparison. We have to ask, why do some of us obsessively check how we stack up, while others genuinely don't seem to care at all?
The truth is, not everyone compares themselves equally. Researchers like Gibbons and Bunk developed this idea of social comparison orientation. Basically, if you have a high orientation, it's heavily tied to uncertainty. If you happen to struggle with low self-esteem, uncertain self-concepts, or symptoms of depression and neuroticism, you are far more likely to rely on external comparisons to figure out what you're worth. On top of that, there's something researchers call an intolerance of ambiguity, which just means you desperately need absolute certainty in a chaotic world, and that need drives you to constantly look at others just to establish your own baseline.
Let's zoom out a bit for section 4, the big fish effect and competitive environments. Because it's not just our internal minds and our close friends. Our immediate physical environments heavily manipulate these built-in psychological drives, too.
Think about this for a second. Is it actually better to be an average student at a super elite, high-achieving school, or the top-performing student at just an average school? It's a massive dilemma, right? It leaves so many ambitious students and their parents totally losing sleep.
Well, a massive global study by Stanford professor Prashant Loyalka gives us the answer, and it's called the big fish, little pond effect. The data clearly shows that being an average fish in a highly competitive big pond causes students to engage in highly negative social comparison. Even though they are objectively smart, these students suffer from severe self-doubt and a negative academic self-concept, all because they're comparing themselves to the absolute geniuses sitting next to them. And remarkably, Loyalka's study proved this is a universal human thing. It affects boys and girls equally across all studied countries, completely regardless of wealth or location.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the social media amplifier, the Facebook effect. So what exactly happens when you take these 1950s psychological drives and put them on digital steroids? A 2026 study published in the Joya Ram Journal takes Festinger's classic theory directly into the modern era. The researchers wanted to measure exactly how platforms like Facebook hijack our natural drive for self-evaluation. Think about it. Festinger said we compare to reduce uncertainty. But what happens when the people we're comparing ourselves to are heavily filtered, meticulously edited, and carefully curated?
Well, Facebook essentially operates as a highlight reel of idealized self-presentations, right? It forces users into this relentless, exhausting loop of upward comparison. You're constantly measuring yourself against those who seem much better off. Maybe you're stalking a rival's picture-perfect vacation photos. On social media, this significantly decreases your self-esteem, leaving students feeling highly inadequate. And on the flip side, downward comparison, looking at those perceived as worse off, offers only a very slight, super temporary boost to the ego. So the whole game is essentially rigged against the user's self-worth.
But here is the really fascinating disconnect the researchers found. Simply racking up screen time on Facebook doesn't directly crush your self-worth. It's a step-by-step process. High-intensity Facebook usage triggers intense social comparison through those endless metrics, the likes, the comments, the follower counts. It forces us to constantly evaluate ourselves against those numbers. It is that specific, triggered comparison process that acts as the bridge, leading directly to the massive psychological impact of lowered self-esteem.
To put a shockingly concrete value on this, the researchers found that this specific digital comparison cycle accounts for, get this, a massive 52% of the variance in a student's self-esteem. Over half, more than half of the variance in how these students value themselves can be entirely explained by this digital comparison cycle. That is absolutely wild.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to remember something crucial. Social comparison is not a character defect. It's a primal drive that researchers identified over 70 years ago. But now that you know your sudden feelings of inadequacy might just be a 1950s psychological drive being actively weaponized by a modern algorithm, how will you take back control of your self-worth the next time you open your phone? Definitely keep that in mind the next time you find yourself mindlessly scrolling. Thanks so much for joining me today.